So you want to help a blind person. First, take a breath. Second, ask, how would I feel if what I'm about to do happened to me?
It's so important to kind of surround ourselves with people who've lived with these challenges and limitations themselves to know that it's fine. It's not that big a deal. We can live through this. Hello everyone, Sakshi Srivastav here. I'm back with a conversation with Christopher this time. His full name is Christopher Nusbaum, and he's an active member of the visually impaired community. He's an AT instructor. He's had his own radio show and podcasts before, and he's done a lot of exciting things. And he's only 26. I feel old. But okay, we are going to hear from him now. He's going to give his own introduction so that you can get to know everything about him. And then we'll dive into a fun conversation. Okay, so starting with Chris, can you share a bit about yourself, including but not limited to the visual impairment part of your identity?
Hi, Sakshi. It's wonderful to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity to be one of the first guests on your podcast, and I love the concept behind it. So, I am somebody who has been totally blind since birth, and my journey has been really one of being constantly mentored by people in the community and then trying to pass on what I've learned to others that I've come into contact with. So a lot of that has come from volunteer work, particularly in the National Federation of the Blind, in which I've held several roles, including um, uh, leadership at the local and state level, both in Maryland, where I live now and where I'm from, and also during my time when I lived in Delaware. I kind of was unexpectedly put into some leadership roles that I didn't have a lot of experience in. All of a sudden, I joined a chapter, and then before I looked, I was chapter president. So,
Wow.
um, and then I've been on the board of the national divisions for the Performing Arts Division and the National Association of Blind Students, both of which are divisions of the NFB. And so all of that has come in from a volunteer perspective, along with the broadcasting work that I've done and the podcasting work. So I've been on your side of the mic as well, you might say. And now I work professionally as an assistive technology trainer working with blind and low vision students. I do that both through my own business, where I work in person and remotely with students who are looking to learn more about how to work with the technology around them, screen readers, braille displays, smartphones,
Hmm.
computers, that sort of thing.
Right.
And also, if they're looking to learn braille,
Right.
because I'm one of those who, though braille was kind of a given for me because I was born without sight, I am one of those who believes that it is always a good idea if we are losing our vision
Mm-hmm.
to get that foundation of literacy,
Right.
and that comes from Braille. And so I am involved in that both through my own company and through a partnership with a company called Allied Instructional Services, and AIS works with school districts across the country. I think they're in 10 states now, or 11 maybe, something like that.
Nice.
So what they do is they send students that they work with to me, and then I work remotely with them while they're in school. So they
Okay.
might be in a class with their teacher, the visually impaired, or their paraprofessional, or somebody, and then I'll come in and work with them individually on their AT needs. And then also part-time, I serve as the project coordinator for a program called the Bridges Technical Assistance Center,
Okay.
which provides resources and one-on-one support for blind students and their families and their educators and community allies.
Mhm.
That program is connected with the Image Center for People with Disabilities, which is a center for independent living here in Maryland.
Okay.
Currently, Bridges ran into a snag with its government grant, so that's
Okay.
kind of fun that we're dealing with.
Oh no.
But but the resource library is still there, and the transition tip blogs are still there. We're now working with a couple interns on some social media projects, so I'm really excited about that.
Nice.
And hopefully, once we can get this thing sorted out, we'll be able to get back to full operation. So that's the sketch on who I am and what I do.
Let's dive deeper. In fact, I love it. You obviously are really into the whole empowering space because, you've belonged there ever since you were born. And
Yeah.
I love that. Honestly, um though again, one of the other ideas of this podcast is to be okay to be uncomfortable, because
Hmm.
I know I can be a lot of times when I'm talking about visual impairment and disability and blindness. I can get a little uncomfortable, and this is also like a personal mission to push through that discomfort. So I'm going to ask maybe some questions which might sound a little odd, but
Sure.
bear with me.
Let's
Okay.
go.
All right, but to begin with, the thought I was going to share was, sometimes I do feel like it's really hard for me to suddenly become visually impaired overnight, because all the way up to 19, I did not have the tools to, it wasn't expected that it will happen, right? So I grew up learning all these tools and ideas and thoughts about being a sighted person. And then suddenly I got to flip, I got to change, I got to adapt. And while I
Uh-huh.
think I'm doing decent for myself, but there's still a lot of things which I feel like I have no clue about, and I'm still discovering. And since my condition is more uh, like it happens over years, so I still have a little vision, which you never know when it'll go. So I feel like I'm still on that journey where I still have the time to figure things out, how to be, what to be, when to be. And so I do feel sometimes that I feel like it's harder that I never had any assistance in terms of any guidance, any assistance in terms of other visually impaired people who could kind of maybe show me the way. I just have been figuring things out on my own for the past decade. So I'm glad you had that. Let's dive a bit deeper into your personal side of things. Tell me about your family. Where did you grow up? Did you have any other, was it something that your parents maybe kind of expected, foresee, or any other siblings with visual impairment, anything that kind of prepared them for this?
So I grew up as an only child. I am an only child, and I grew up here in Maryland, where I have recently returned, and that's where I'm from. That's where my parents are from. And I think that was really a blessing for me in terms of my blindness in a number of ways. For one thing, as some of your listeners may know, the National Federation of the Blind has been headquartered in this area for a little over 40 years.
Right.
The NFB headquarters are in Baltimore City, down in the Federal Hill neighborhood.
Mhm.
And so it was pretty easy to access NFB events for parents and for kids
Mm-hmm.
and get that exposure to other blind people and parents of blind kids.
Yeah.
And I think that that was really fundamental for my parents when I was little in determining what the reasonable expectations were
Mm-hmm.
for me. And I think that they were open to that, which was really important for me.
Yeah.
And they took me along to a lot of those things because anytime that there was a parent event at NFB, there was also some sort of child care or child
Right.
activity.
Yeah.
And what made NFB stuff unique was that the babysitters were blind, right? So, so, and if you've been around NFB
Uh-huh.
for a while, or if you are around there now, you would recognize, even if you're not from here, you
Yeah.
would recognize some of the names of the people who babysat me because they are either leaders in their own right or they're spouses of NFB, either state or
Amazing.
national leaders, right? So, so all of that was really instrumental in how they approached blindness and how, consequently, I have.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think also uh, my mom, I think as I was a baby starting out,
Yeah.
got involved in a couple online groups
Okay.
for parents of blind children.
Hmm.
And one of those was started by two blind people
Okay.
who contributed really actively to them. So when parents would come out with questions about, how do I teach them how to do whatever,
Yeah.
or how do I deal with this social situation, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
not only would other parents come back with strategies, but also the blind people would come back with their own lived experiences.
Nice. Can you
Uh,
give us an
and
example of something like that
yeah,
for
sure.
other
So,
parents?
so an example that my mom has given, I don't remember it happening because I was too young,
Ah,
but an example that she's given is that there was a problem that she was having where when I was little, I couldn't find toys and I was getting frustrated, I guess.
yeah.
And so somebody in the group suggested that you take a hula hoop and you put the
Okay.
toys in the hula hoop. So at least there was a kind of
Interesting.
order, I guess. So that I could go around and find these little toys in it.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing I was going to mention about that group is it's kind of cool because in more recent years,
Mm-hmm.
those two people who started that group, I have been able to meet and get to know them. And so one in particular, I don't think Sarah knew how much of an impact
Yeah.
she had on me for so many years. All right, okay, now that we brought her up, here's a great example. So this is I'm a little older in, I don't know, second or third grade,
Uh-huh.
and I had just started to ride the bus and walk home from the bus stop by myself. Now, the bus stop was only a block or two from my house, but I still needed to cross two little side streets to get there. And we were in a quiet, suburban neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But there were still a couple streets to cross. There was one day that I got really lost. And
Oh,
I had practiced this thing over and over and over again
yeah.
with and without my O&M, orientation mobility teacher. And I thought I had it down, but there was one day I just got super lost. I was
Oh,
frustrated. I was scared, all the things. And so I don't remember now if mom posted something to the group or if she reached out to Sarah directly,
Mhm.
but the next day
Mhm.
she I remember or maybe it was that night I remember her just telling me, this is like 8-year-old me. She's like, Miss Sarah wanted me to tell you that she gets lost all the time. Don't worry about
Oh, God, that's amazing.
it. So and I still remember that 20 years later.
Wow.
But also, what I remember even more was when I met her for the first time in person and got to thank her for that
That's amazing.
because it really boosted my confidence. I mean, do I get frustrated? Of course, when I get lost, of course I do. Every blind person does.
Yeah.
But it's something that I remember that everybody does it.
That's amazing. That
So
kind of
we
reinforces the point that people who've lived with these challenges and limitations themselves, because just
Right.
that shared experience and to know that it's fine, it's not that big a deal, we can live through this, it's like so important. Um, in contrast to that, I went to Taj Mahal one time with my friends. Okay, so
Oh, cool.
yeah, it's really close to where I've been born and brought up, New Delhi.
Uh-huh.
And we were this really big group of 10, 15 youngsters. And of course, as these things happen, everybody breaks into like smaller groups. And somehow, some way, that really crowded place, I got lost. And I just kept walking around for the next couple of hours,
I
or maybe it was a few
I can't
minutes.
imagine why with how big the Taj Mahal is, but
That's exactly why. I mean, because it's so massive, some friend was ahead, some friends were behind. I don't know who I was with. I have no clue how it ended up happening. I just was lost for the next couple of hours, which felt like days. I just kept wandering around. And at the end of it, when I finally was able to kind of cross paths with them, oh my God, I was so overwhelmed. I ended up crying at that point rather than when I was actually lost.
I've been there.
God, it was scary. If I now I imagine if only at that point somebody would have been like, you know what, that happens, shit happens,
Yep.
you can get
Yep.
over it. And I would have been like, I would have felt so much better because that
I know.
is still lives with me. Like,
Yeah.
damn, I don't think I can go to crowded places by myself anymore. But no, I
Well,
can.
but I think you told me and now I'm curious.
Go ahead.
We're we're breaking all the rules of interviewing here.
Yes, we are.
So you told me in our pre-show call that you were at the NFB convention in Orlando
Yep.
this summer,
Hmm.
which I was also at, but it was
Oh,
your first convention and it was my 11th. Um, and you said, if I remember correctly, that it was your first experience with a bunch of blind people in one building,
yep.
which is really an unforgettable experience.
It really is.
So, how was that for you as far as like the disorientation that a lot of people talk about experiencing in those situations of feeling like, oh my God, I'm gonna get lost in this place with all these blind people?
For me, it was fantastic. I'll be honest. Of course, there were chances where I would like maybe lose my way, get lost, but I had the sighted friend with me. So that worked out. However, what
Ah,
overshadowed
you didn't get
everything?
the full experience then.
No, I did not, unfortunately. Next
Next
time,
year,
perhaps.
next year.
Yeah. The only feeling that overshadowed everything else for me was just being surrounded by so many brilliant people who
Yeah,
are, all ages, all genders, all everything. People
right.
with other people, people with dogs, people with canes, people just with other sighted people. Oh my God, having everybody in one place, it felt so empowering. I
Hmm.
absolutely love the experience. There's nothing that can keep me away from these
Nothing like it.
conventions.
Nothing like it.
Yep. Okay, so Okay, so it's obviously very clear that you had a lot of blind and visually impaired people around you growing up. How about sighted people? Have you had a lot of those around you growing up? How comfortable are you around them? What is, or do you even not think of them as two separate groups? Is it all the same? How do you look at that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, well, I guess the first question, or the first part of that answer is yes. I definitely do have a lot of sighted people in my life. Everybody in my family is sighted. A lot of my
Mm-hmm.
friends are sighted, although that's an interesting thing in itself. I think I have more sighted friends now
Mm-hmm.
than I did in, say, high school because when when I high school was around the time when I really started getting involved in the blind community.
Okay.
And high school was also the time, as all of us who have experienced high school know, when kids get clicky, right?
Yep.
Um, and so it was also for me anyway, the time when all of a sudden I was not as accepted as
Mm-hmm.
I had been before, or I had been having trouble, with notable exceptions,
Mm-hmm.
making friends as I had before.
Yeah.
Because, people had kind of gotten into their little groups and
Yep.
I wasn't in the little group.
Yeah.
Um, I I did have, it was interesting. I did have, my interests, one interest in particular being music that should have put me in a group.
Yeah.
The choir and theater kids
Right.
stick together. We always do because nobody else gets us. We're usually a pretty
Yeah.
tight-knit group. Um, but even then, at least at my school, I found myself kind of on the outside of that group, and I don't really know why. Maybe because I was in choir, but not the plays. I don't know. But
Wow.
anyway, so in at that time, most of my friends were blind or low vision.
Mm-hmm.
But in college and beyond, I've gotten to have more sighted friends along with my blind friends. So there's a lot more of a mixture now.
Nice.
Um, and as I say, everybody else in my family is sighted.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second part of your question, that's kind of interesting. Do I consider them to be not two separate groups? I guess they are, at least they are in the sense that there's a physical separation between those who have sight and those who don't, just because of that sense.
Absolutely.
But in in terms of making friends or even having relationships, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. For me, I feel like it's exhausting and counterproductive to go through life making a degree of separation
Right.
between uh, each person just based on this one characteristic. If I have come to, as I have from being around other blind people, that blindness is just one of many characteristics,
Yeah.
then that is how I would want to approach my relationships with other people,
Right.
which leads to a question that has been debated for years about whether there's such a thing as a blind culture.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting. Tell us more about that.
so, so you may be familiar with deaf culture, and I don't know much about it. I need to do some more reading up on it.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the idea is that, as I understand it, that because the deaf community has a distinct form of communication, that
Right.
being sign language,
Mm-hmm.
and that they have this whole community built around it. They want to establish and have established this subculture, I guess, that's unique to them. And first time I read something about blind culture was a few years ago when there was an article published in the NFB's magazine. Somebody had written to Barbara Pierce, who was the editor of the Monitor at the time, the Braille Monitor, which is that magazine,
Okay.
um, who was the editor at that time. She's no longer the editor. Somebody had written to Barbara, and he was doing a research project, I think, about disability culture and asked her to tell him about blind culture. And Barbara wrote back and said, "There's no such thing." Um, and her point was that for blind and visually impaired people, the emphasis is so much on getting accepted in the wider society as a whole, that is, being equal to sighted people, getting access to everything that everybody else has access to,
Yeah.
that there's really no point in or no time to get this whole separate culture together. And and I see her point and I agree with it. And yet every time I go to a convention like the one you went to,
Yeah.
I come away from that week thinking there is definitely something different
Yep.
about being around 3,000 blind people that would make one think that there may be some kind of culture, at least there's a reason that we would use the term culture shock to describe the experience of somebody stepping into a room with a bunch of blind people, all in one place, like we were talking about for the first time.
That is so true. Yes.
So, is there a blind culture? I really don't know. I could see arguments on both sides of that question, but for me, in my personal life, I come at it that I put my relationships with blind people and sighted people all in a big melting pot, I guess, which is why I come at the other, age-old blind community question about would you rather date a blind person or a sighted person with the opinion stated in two words, who cares?
Yes, I was wondering. Nobody asked me that ever, and I was just wondering if they had, what would be my answer? I have no idea. I have felt differently at different stages in life. Sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Who cares? Who gives a shit who you're
Right.
dating, who you're marrying, who you're doing what with? Like, as long
Right.
as those two people are getting along, doesn't matter. Sometimes you could not get along, like I could not get along with a visually impaired person and get fantastically along with somebody who's sighted. And in other situations, I'm like, dude, I hate being surrounded by sighted people. And I wish I had more visually impaired
No,
people around me.
but it was an interesting little thought experiment because I was on a panel
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't about relationships or anything. I think it was about like web accessibility, but it was on one of the guys who was on the panel with me, I knew was married to a sighted lady, and I knew both of them, and it interestingly, they both work for NFB. So
Hmm.
he's blind, she's sighted, and they both work around blind people all the time.
Nice.
And he brought up something about getting access to things that are inaccessible in their first format. So you get something like the first time around, then it doesn't work. So how do you do a workaround that makes it accessible?
Right.
And so I came back when it was my turn and I asked him, because I had never had this experience, how much does he ask her to read something? Or how much does he ask for her help with that stuff? And his
Mhm.
answer was really interesting to me, which was that he only uses her as a reader or, a sighted helper, I guess, as a last resort. Be
Interesting.
because even if that's the most convenient thing, because, her being
Right
there with
there.
him, right?
Yeah.
He only uses her as a last resort, and his reasoning behind that was that if he were to do that more often, he doesn't want the relationship to become distracted by him always asking her for stuff,
So true.
and that to become a resentment or something, which is something I'd never thought about before, but that I'm sure would be important for
It really is. So
a
if I
healthy
have
marriage.
yeah, I have a similar story. I'm married to a sighted guy,
Hmm.
and it's an everyday thing. Not for him, maybe, but for me, I am always thinking about making sure that I'm equally adding value. Like God
Right.
forbid if the balance was tipped even a little bit, sometimes I'm even overcompensating for it. Okay, I'm not able to do X thing. I'm just gonna go crazy doing the Y thing to make sure that I will sometimes you gotta it's something that you have to kind of think about it, because at the end of the day, I cannot make it their responsibility to look after me. They're not
Yeah.
a parent, right? They're a partner for a reason. So
Right. Right.
it's gotta be more give and take rather than just take. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that it's one of the challenges of being with a sighted person, I suppose, because
Yeah.
always
Do
wanna.
you do you ever though have, because he mentioned this,
Mhm.
as did somebody else I was talking to who's in a similar relationship, uh, that you're out and somebody basically assumes that he, meaning your husband,
Mhm.
is there to take care of you. Is that something you've had to deal with?
Yeah, all the time. Anybody who's not very familiar with this whole space, or me as an individual, it's their first instinct. If they're trying to do something for me or with me or around me, associated to me, they'll go to him first. Like, okay,
Right.
he's my representative and he will take care of everything before the whole thing reaches me. I mean, in
Yeah.
general, and it's really frustrating, it's really annoying, but at the end of the day, I just remind myself I got to pick my battles. I cannot fight every single battle every single day, because it's happening all the time. Like, I think my take on this whole point is that every relationship has its pros and cons, and these relationships are no different. Like, you could be dating a sighted person or a visually impaired person. You will have your pros and cons, and as individuals who we are, we kind of assess those, what we are able to manage, which limitations, and which we can't, and we kind of just pick and choose that kind of relationship, whatever we are able to find our happiness with.
I
And
think that's true not just of romantic relationships, but of friendships too. I remember getting, when I was first introduced to my roommate in college, who turned out to be one of my best friends there, and roommates changed sophomore year,
Mhm.
which was fine by me because the roommate I had freshman year joined a frat a few months in, and I never saw him again. So I got this new roommate, and I don't remember if I told him I was blind or somebody else did. But anyway, he asked what I would need him to do.
Hmm.
And I kind of hesitated, and I was like, what do I tell him? And so I said, well, I don't know. So I'm going to just say that I don't need you to do anything that you wouldn't do for any other roommate. And if that changes, I'll let you know.
Amazing. That's such a fantastic answer because a lot of times I'm thinking that okay, this person, somehow it turns out that someone is being kind to me or extra nice to me once they realize that I'm visually impaired. And then I'm like, why can't you just be like this with everybody all the time? Why do
Right.
you have to find out that someone is disabled to kind of bring that nice person out of you? It's just be like that all the time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really happen, does it?
Somebody posted something interesting on Facebook this morning
Yeah.
about helping a blind person or visually impaired person. And you see all the time these things about how to help a blind person, how to guide a blind person, etc.
Yeah.
And he took a kind of different approach. What he said was, so you want to help a blind person, I'm paraphrasing here. So you want to help a blind person, I need you to do two things. First, take a breath. Second, ask, uh, how would I feel if what I'm about to do happened to me?
Nice.
I thought that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Because if and before and also before I give a bunch of instructions that I lay out on a step one, step two, step three thing that I expect somebody to remember,
Yeah.
uh, that yeah, it's that simple. That right, the golden rule: do
Yeah.
to others as you would have them do to you.
Yep.
Uh, and
And that can
so
apply to any kind of learning, right? Any
right,
of the
so
personal behavior.
so if if you would feel kind of grossed out by somebody randomly grabbing your arm without talking to you,
God.
then you might not want to do that to somebody else either.
Yeah, just maybe, just
Yeah,
consider it. That is so true. I think it just needs like don't want to downplay it by saying, "Oh, it's so basic, you should already know." I know it's hard because I've been on the other side and zero exposure to disabilities or blindness or visual impairment. Zero exposure till 19, and then suddenly I was on the other side, so which means not only was I fighting the stereotypes and the expectations on the outside world, which were very limiting. I was also fighting those from within because unknowingly somewhere I had picked them up too. So it's like, so I don't want to downplay their struggles. Sure, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, but it actually it's not hard, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it
it
might be
is.
because you're not able to kind of relate instantly with that person because of superficial reasons, but breathe. That's where you
It
kind of
right, it
go
is. It
deeper,
is.
and
And
then
that's a balancing act too for
yeah,
us, right? Because on one hand, you're trying to, give grace and be patient, recognizing the fact that a lot of what happens comes out of a place of just not knowing.
yeah,
Um, the definition of ignorance, a lack of knowledge, while on the other hand, we just deal with it so much that it happens and you just want to be like, dude.
I know. I know, it's like, come on,
So,
this is basic decency.
right.
I shouldn't have to
So,
teach you this.
so that is a balancing act, and so I think that's what the community is for.
Yeah,
We are, at least is what I try to do. I'm patient with people and try to educate, and then I go to my and then I go to a blind friend who gets it, and we talk each other off a ledge.
yeah, I know, so important. Gotta get it off our chests.
Yep.
Okay, so since we are talking so much about things that we agree on, as visually impaired blind people, let's talk about some things that could be completely subjective and thus addressing the stereotype that this community is a monolith, right? Can you, in your experience with yourself, with someone else, something where you felt that we were kind of pushing the limits or challenging the stereotypes within the community that visually impaired people or blind people kind of pressurize themselves and other community members who might be new to the space, and where we can kind of, let it go and not hold on to those stereotypes.
Well, let me address kind of an elephant in the room because I've already mentioned a few times in this interview an organization that I'm in, the National Federation of the Blind. And
Yeah.
I recognize that a few people in this audience, or maybe more than a few, might have just mentally turned me off at the first time I mentioned NFB
Blah.
because of some myths around that
Yeah.
organization. And unfortunately, some of those myths, because of some of the ways that certain people in the organization may have acted in the past, or
Mhm.
some may still act, may be justified. Uh, but NFB, to its credit, has been really taking a hard look at itself in the past few years and has been really working publicly to address those myths. And the big one,
Yeah.
for me anyway, is this. I'll use my friend Daniil Lewis's term, and he hosts their podcast, the Nation's Blind podcast.
Okay.
I'll use his term because I love it. The myth of the model blind person.
Oh, I
Um,
love it.
yeah, and and so this idea is like, in order to be the right kind of blind person. You
Yeah.
have to do this, this, and this. Or in order even to be a member of the Federation, you have to be this type of blind person. There is one way to be blind, and that might mean that you have to use a certain kind of cane, or you have to be a Braille reader,
Yeah.
or you have to, uh, have this kind of training.
Yeah.
And I don't really know where this one came from, but some people believe that, according to either the NFB as an organization or leaders within it, that those who they consider to be the model blind person never ask for help from anybody.
Oh, oh God, that's
To
painful.
to which I say, have you been around NFB for 10 minutes? Um, so it's and not and I think there's no greater debunking
Uh-huh.
of that myth than the experience that you and I had
Yeah.
this summer. There were 2,500 people in that building, and none of them were the model blind person because there's no such thing. So, and and as you mentioned earlier, they were all different. We were all different.
Yeah.
You had a sighted person with you, and I gently teased you about that. Um, but I know that there were a few people who did, maybe more than a few. And to be honest with you, there were a few times that week when I wish I had. I have a friend who brought her husband with her, who is sighted, and he uh, was helping with some things that she was coordinating, but but he wasn't with her all the time. He was mostly there to take care of the baby so that she
Yeah.
could run around and do all the convention stuff she was doing. Interesting, going back to what you said, I just had a thought about
Yeah.
our conversation about the word disability.
Uh-huh.
I have noticed that you mentioned and have used in a lot of questions throughout this interview the term visually impaired, which nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But naturally, I have not used that term. I've sometimes said low vision, but I've mostly just said blind just because that's naturally what I call myself and refer to our community as a whole as, and I think that that's what a lot of blind people refer to be or prefer to be identified as. So I wonder is there something in particular that makes you always add the visually impaired part?
Yes, I think one, it's habit, and two,
Hmm.
why I acquired the habit was I think one, I might be trying not to offend people and myself.
Mm.
I think it could, I think it's a fantastic question, which I should think about in my next, post my next meditation session. But just off the top of my head, there could be multiple reasons. One, I didn't want to fall into the stereotype of being blind, because that stereotype in our
Mm.
culture, especially, could be really scary, and I just couldn't relate to the image I had in my head as a 19-year-old of a blind person. I'm like, that's not me. I've got to be something else. I'm not like blind, this
I'm not
version of it we've
blind.
seen.
I'm right.
Yeah, I just can't
I
see. I
can't
mean,
be
big
that
deal.
person.
I know, I think that's where it started, that my mission of finding a different terminology, uh,
Yeah.
some other word for it.
I just wonder, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the term. I just wonder if it's having the opposite effect.
Yep.
That uh, like, for example, when somebody calls me visually impaired, it doesn't necessarily apply to me because there's no vision to impair. I'm totally
Yeah.
blind.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, the bigger point is there's no problem with the word blind.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I,
Though that
and,
is my recent development in the past
and
couple of years. I'm trying to
yeah,
be more comfortable with the words blind and disabled and things that I was trying actively not to associate with. I'm trying to associate with those words
yeah,
actively.
there's,
But in this particular context of this podcast, I do use visually impaired as well,
okay,
because I'm trying to kind of pull in people who are not completely blind yet and who've just started on their journey of losing vision, like
gotcha.
myself,
Okay,
because
okay,
I'm still losing and I started like 15 years ago. So, it's a very vague space. Okay, now I don't see, but I'm not completely blind yet. But tomorrow
yeah,
I'll see even less. It's a complete long drawn journey where you don't know when to kind of switch over to the like
yeah,
completely accept the whole thing, when
yeah.
it's too soon, when
One,
it's too
one
late.
of the
I'm trying
things
to,
One
yeah.
of the things, for what it's worth, and then I'll stop. One of the things that I love about being involved in the parts of the community that I've been involved in is they're the parts where don't really have what's sometimes been called a hierarchy of sight,
Hmm.
where there's the totally blind people over here and the low vision people on over here and the what's sometimes called the high partials
Yeah.
over here, you know. So to the point where ideally
Hmm.
when somebody asks me, how much vision does she have? I don't know.
Okay.
And we're all blind. So, and in just my personal opinion, that I think is just a great way to be, because
Yeah.
we've all gotten
I
gotten
feel like the sooner
past
we
that.
kind of, just get along with the
Mm.
terminologies, the better it is and the more empowered we are and quicker,
Hmm.
right? And the more we kind of hold it off, is just you're harming yourself. Like, you're not reaching out to the beautiful resources like NFP that are out there, which could basically give you back most of your life if you thought, oh, now I can't do this, now I can't do that, this is gone for me, that is no more an option for me. Once you reach out to these resources, you kind of realize that, okay, it wasn't the end of life as I had thought. There are a bunch of things that I can still do, and here are the ways that they're telling me how to do them. So
There you
it's
go.
really important to kind of just you know accept it, the
Yep.
terms. All right, I think with that it's a wrap. And For our listeners, I would say please leave us any comments, any questions you might have for Chris or myself. I will list down every single resource that Chris mentioned in this conversation in the description, and I hope you like it. Okay, bye bye. Thank you, Chris, for being here.
Thank you very much.